But that said, the Turkish side doesn't appear to be in a rush to change the situation. Erdogan has certainly toned down in recent months his strong criticism of Israel, but the statements from them and what we've heard today remain Israel knows what to do. And at the same time, Turkey is practicing a kind of program of diplomatic, shall we say, sanctions against Israel, blocking the country's participation in various international forums, and keeping Israel sort of on notice that until it does what it knows it needs to do, things will be tough for it. So what are the prospects for the future? I would say that for now, the fact that we have to wait for massive fires in Israel and earthquakes in Turkey for any kind of breakthrough is not very encouraging. What we learned from the most recent report of the Israeli comptroller, Michael Strauss, which looked at the Mavi Marmara event, was that one of the reasons that the Mavi Marmara incident, turned out the way it did was because the already frayed relationship between the two countries there was already very little high-level communication at the time that the flotilla was about to go. And so considering the potentially explosive issues that are out there right now, gas exploration or energy exploration in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Cyprus issue, Syria, Iran, Palestinian issue, having a complete lack of communication right now, which is what we have between the two countries, is very dangerous and a real recipe for disaster. So what that really leaves us with is the only option, it seems right now, is that the two countries need some sort of outside push, shall we say, and that obviously is an American push, because I can't really see it coming from Europe or really anywhere else, to help the countries set up some sort of mechanisms that they can perhaps go around the Mavi Marmara incident, perhaps go around the more recent history and find ways to cooperate, perhaps in the energy fields, perhaps through trade. The two countries are very entrepreneurial, have high-tech industries that are developing, and find a way to create perhaps some sort of mechanism for cooperation. It seems like that right now is really, it's not necessarily possible, but otherwise it's hard to see what else can do it. Ultimately, I think restoring relations to a level of trust, open communication, and the ability to cooperate in a variety of realms, and not just militarily as it used to be, it's an imperative for both countries. For Israel, it's a strategic reason, obviously. I think for Turkey, it goes a bit deeper. I was recently fare shopping on the Turkish Airlines website and noticed they had a big promotional box, and it said transit through Istanbul to Tel Aviv or Tehran. It was in the same box. And, almost the same price. Your choice. But I think it says a lot, that said to me a lot about the role that Turkey wants to play and can play in the region. I mean, right now Turkish Airlines flies to both Tel Aviv. Turkish Airlines flies to both Tel Aviv and Tehran, but the government, which used to sort of boast we're the only ones welcome both in Jerusalem and Tehran, is not welcome, certainly in Jerusalem. I think in Tehran, obviously, there's issues there too. So renewing its ties with Israel, I think for Turkey, would allow it to, again, reclaim the role of regional mediator it had sought to create for itself in recent years, and to again establish itself as the region's political, economic, religious, and cultural crossroads, a role that it can and should play, but currently can't. Thank you.
Thank you, Yigal. Thanks also for finishing a little bit ahead of time. Robin Wright.
Thank you very much. I am the last speaker of the day. And I have the hottest topic, Syria and Iran. I think these two countries are fascinating to discuss in context of Turkey, because they represent in many ways some of the most profound achievements of the Turkish government during its first 7 years, and also two of its toughest challenges over the last year and a half. When you take a step back and look at what the AKP government has done, it talks about creating a foreign policy with 360-degree strategic depth. And it has done extraordinary things in becoming one of the world's arguably most important half-dozen countries. It's clearly the most important player in the 57 nations of the Islamic world. It is the model for democratization in the 22 nations of the Arab world. It's the world's 17th largest economy, due to become the 15th next year, and it's going to host going to head the G20 in 2015. It's just, become such a big player under the AKP government. It's recognized as the soft power giant in the Middle East. And I've read one thing this morning that even called Turkey the China of Europe, and I often laugh at when you think about how it's a good thing that Turkey didn't become a member of the European Union, because otherwise it'd be bailing Greece out. Now, Syria and Iran are particularly interesting as both reflect, as I said, Turkey's expanding reach in the region and what it wants. Iran was important to Turkey as a source of energy, which it needs to fuel its economic growth. Iran is also an issue around which Turkey can display its new diplomatic muscle, its standing in the world as a big player. And Syria, of course, was important as a source of new markets, and again, in allowing Turkey to play a bigger role even in Arab-Israeli peace. But over the past 18 months, both countries have also become a real headache for Turkey. And the tensions with both countries have undermined this attempt to become the big player and its credibility as being able to navigate and lead negotiations. Now, Syria is Turkey's longest border, some 500 miles. And until last year, Turkey had significantly improved relations with Syria. It's really amazing when you think that Erdogan and Assad called each other personal friends and their families went on vacations together. Davutoglu said that Syria and Turkey shared a common fate, a common history, and a common future. Trade grew significantly under the AKP. In 2004, Erdogan flew to Damascus to sign a free trade agreement. Diplomacy deepened. Assad visited Turkey in 2007, and President Gül visited Syria in 2009. Turkey also took on a role in regional peace by launching a new diplomatic effort between Israel and Syria on the Golan Heights after President Bush cut off negotiations and kind of the dialogue with Syria. And Turkey arguably became the most credible player when it came to the peace process during that period. In 2007, Davutoglu shuttled between Damascus and Ankara 20 times, and in 2008, he hosted 5 rounds of diplomacy in Ankara, shuttling between the hotels of the two delegations. Militarily, the two countries expanded their borders significantly. In 2009, they held 3-day joint military maneuvers, hard to believe, isn't it, in which they both had access to each other's outposts crossing the border. What a contrast with today. Over the past year, Erdogan has repeatedly talked about the 16-month uprising in terms of Syrian tactics, calling it savagery. Turkey has done more, at least visibly, than any other single country in helping the opposition in its many forms and often at a cost. Economically, Turkey has suspended the kind of trade relations and trade agreements that it had built up over the previous 7 years. It also absorbed, as we know, thousands of refugees who'd fled mainly the fighting in the north. Politically, Turkey is now the base for the Syrian opposition, the Syrian National Council. And militarily, it's the front line for the Syrian Free Army, and reportedly the route for some of the arms going to the rebels. But since this spring, tensions have actually tangibly escalated between the militaries of Syria and Turkey. In April, Syrian forces fired across the border into Turkey. And Erdogan announced in a speech before Parliament just today that there had been 5 incursions recently by Syrian helicopters. And of course, last Friday, the shooting down of an F-4 reconnaissance plane. In a speech to Parliament today, Erdogan called Syria a clear and imminent threat. Again, what a contrast. And he called Assad, a man who he once went on vacation with, a bloody dictator. He warned that however valuable Turkey's friendship is, its wrath is just as strong. He said, "Don't take our common sense and cautious approach as a sign of passivity." It was very strong language. So the question is this episode a turning point, a tipping point? After Erdogan's speech today, the Turkish media reported that new troop reinforcements had been deployed to the border with Syria and that they had been put on high alert. The latest tensions may not be a decisive turning point, but it's really hard to see, given what's happened, particularly since April, that these countries, at least under these two leaders, are going to have anything resembling a normal relationship anytime soon. It'll take a long time, I think, to get back to where they were, and a change in the leadership in Damascus. Now, on Iran, my other subject, Iran is Turkey's second longest border, about 300 miles. Relations, again, just like Syria, have been strengthened under the AKP. Politically, both countries are now led by Islamist governments, even though there are very profound differences. One Sunni, one Shiite, one led by clergy, one led by an elected, democratically elected government. Economically, the two countries have deepened ties again under the AKP. Over the last 5 years, trade has actually doubled to some $10 billion, with expectations that trade could triple in the not too distant future. Last year, 1/3 of Turkey's oil imports came from Iran. Iran was Turkey's 5th largest customer, buying at least 200,000 barrels a day from Iran, which was 7% of Iran's oil exports. Turkey also imported 20% of its natural gas from Iran. And this month, a visiting Iranian cabinet minister said in Turkey that trade between the two countries had reached $16 billion last year. On diplomacy, again, Turkey and Iran became very close in the process of trying to navigate the international community's pressure over Iran's nuclear program. And in March, Erdogan personally went to Tehran after meeting President Obama at an international summit in South Korea. And with Brazil, Erdogan had been pivotal in actually trying to broker a deal separately when the previous U.S. effort fell through and Iran walked away from it. With the current round, of course, everyone looked to Istanbul to host a new effort and for Turkey to play a key role in pressing the Iranians. So Turkey really has been they talk about the P5+1, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and Germany as the key players in negotiating with Iran. But there is a 7th player out there that plays a very important role, and that's Turkey. But the Turks also have become increasingly frustrated, like the rest of the world, with Iran's stubbornness and the failure of diplomacy to make real headway. And so that relationship, I think, has gone through some significant setbacks, in part because of pressure by the United States. Over the last month, Turkey has cut back on oil imports from Iran. In, I think, May, it was down to 100 and it was down from 200. It had been 270,000 barrels per day in May, and in June, no, in April, and then in May it went down to 170,000 barrels. So there was a significant decline, and this is because Turkey faces real pressure.
2 minutes.
Okay, I've got less than that. In trying to receive a waiver from the United States on sanctions. Otherwise, Turkey would also pay a price. And Turkey is now actively talking to Saudi Arabia and some of the Caucasus states about finding alternative sources of oil. So you see this tension brewing between the two because of the failure on nuclear talks to actually make success and Iran's stubbornness to find a solution.